Hey, how are you, Mensa? Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Obviously, it is a busy day after a extremely busy crisis and tragedy in the city of Philadelphia that thankfully and miraculously ended with no loss of life and serious, but as far as we know at this time, not debilitating injuries to our law enforcement officers after 4:30 and all the way up to about 1 o'clock in the morning yesterday. In essence, I'm here to answer questions. There are some that I cannot answer and will not answer that I think are better answered, for example, by the police commissioner, and others that may bear on the integrity of an investigation or may simply be things I don't know. But I do want to start with this. I want to make sure that everyone knows what Maurice Hill we're talking about, because there are 5, if I counted correctly, 5 different Maurice Hills who appear with different birth dates in the Philadelphia and Pennsylvania criminal records database. The individual who was involved in the shooting yesterday is a Maurice Hill with a date of birth of April the 26th, 1983. That record is publicly available, at least all the portions that are not sealed by statute, and that record shows a criminal record as an adult going back to the early 2000s and extending up to a few years ago. The most recent case that I'm seeing as I flip through, it's approximately 12 pages, is a conviction from 2012. To the best of our knowledge, the reporting that there was a federal conviction of Mr. Maurice Hill and that he did federal time is also correct, that there was federal supervision, at least up until about 2016. To the best of our knowledge, that is also correct, and we are gathering that information. Now, having said that, because there are some people, both last night and today, in the media who have either been misled or have been confused about what Maurice Hill we're talking about, that having been said, are there any questions?
During the time that you have been the district attorney, has your office had any connection or any prosecution of this man?
As best I can tell, the answer is absolutely not. As best I can tell, there has been no new criminal matter in the city and county of Philadelphia in 2018, 2019, and I believe not even something originating in 2017, which would be the year before we were in office. I cannot tell you at this time whether there may have been an occasion when there was a violation hearing during this administration in relation to those many, many, many convictions that happened during the administration of Lynn Abraham or the administration of Seth Williams. And this is, in fact, a 12-page extract of criminal matters that were handled by those administrations. I can't say that, but I can say that if there's any contact at all, it would not have been on an open criminal matter.
Based on your analysis, sir, should this man have not been on the streets?
Well, I think it's clear this man should not have been on the streets in the sense that he obviously was a tremendous danger to the public and to law enforcement. But if you're asking me, do I believe that everybody in the system going back to 2007 and up until the present has a crystal ball? I do not. I mean, we could, for example, ask the head of the FOP, who's been in office since 2007, what efforts he saw and whether he had a crystal ball about this. We could also ask various commissioners, many of whom I deeply admire, whether they had a crystal ball. So I don't think it's fair to expect some level of perfect knowledge on the part of police or prosecutors, but it is obvious, looking at the actions taken here, that this was someone who needed to be off the streets, and it is also clear that he had a very lengthy criminal record going back quite some time.
What exactly is he being charged with?
The charges have not been brought yet. This investigation is ongoing. I cannot tell you every single charge, but I can certainly tell you some obvious ones. It is pretty obvious that there should be charges of attempted murder. It's pretty obvious there should be charges of aggravated assault in the first degree. It's pretty obvious that there are some serious firearms charges, including the fact that he was a felon before he was handling this weapon. There is drug involvement here, and depending on how this investigation develops, it is very likely that there may be some drug charges as well. There certainly are other possibilities, such as conspiracy, possibly even a conspiracy that encompasses more days than this one particular day involving drug activity, but an awful lot of these details are not available to us now. Many of them may not even be available to police yet, and there has been some collaboration and coordination between both federal and state authorities, so there may be additional sources of information as well. I am saying more than we usually say because I understand the public wants to know more, and rightly so, but I would say there will be a lot of charges. These are more than enough charges so that Mr. Maurice Hill may never exit jail.
Larry, he had an attempted murder charge a little over a decade ago. What do you know about that case in particular, if anything?
I don't specifically know about that yet. We are starting to dig into the specifics of his case. I mean, I could refer to this extract to try to locate the one that you're talking about, but in terms of having the original file, having reviewed it, I've not done that.
Do you have any details about his criminal history, and in particular firearms violations? Can you expound at all on any of his past criminal history?
I can, and I would say this is also available to the public at the UJS portal. But, you know, we see a lot of different types of charges. We see burglary charges, escape charges. We see peculiar charges like illegally taunting a police animal. We see resisting arrest. We see multiple charges for aggravated assault, for drugs, for DUI, for reckless endangerment of another person, traffic-related activity and driving-related activity. We see gun charges of a variety of different types. There is even a conviction on perjury. There are charges relating to drugs in connection with guns. So it is quite an extensive criminal record. There's a robbery charge in here. And I'm not saying every one of these resulted in a conviction, but there certainly has been a lengthy and extensive criminal record that includes many convictions in the state system. There is also a record in the federal system. I have not seen it, but I have been advised that the record in the federal system includes a lengthy prison sentence in federal prison for weapons.
What does that say
How
about?
many convictions are there? Can you just sort that? How many convictions are there, and how much time has he spent in prison?
There are several. Honestly, I don't want to give you all the specifics. There's been some reporting around it. We can get you the answer. But I haven't bothered to itemize that. I could go through it with you here if you want, but it's also available on that
What does that say
document.
about the system? What does that say about the system's ability or inability to handle a person with this kind of capacity for breaking the law and apparently being violent and doing it with guns?
Well, I think what it says is that the system had multiple contacts with this man, and the system, following its policies and its philosophy at those times, did things that obviously did not stop this incident. I think it says that. I think it also is an illustration of what should be obvious, because it's obvious to us in medicine. It should be obvious in law, that what a lot of us do in law enforcement is risk management, and that there will be, like it or not, occasions when there are bad results. And the real measure of the police, for example, or others, I don't even want to call people out, but the real measure of all of us in law enforcement is not whether or not there's a bad outcome. There will be bad outcomes. The measure is, do you manage it better than other people managed it?
You obviously have a contentious relationship with police.
Were you on the phone last night during these negotiations, and if so, how would that affect this case?
So there was a time when I was on the phone. Let me explain how that occurred. And I don't believe it has an effect on this case, but it's certainly something we will have to look at when we have more information. Mr. Maurice Hill, the one whose birth date is April the 26th of 1983, apparently was represented by Shaka Johnson, who is a known Philadelphia County criminal defense attorney, has been around for some time. I was informed by Mr. Johnson that Johnson had represented Hill in the past. I received a call on my cell phone. It was probably about 9 o'clock p.m., 9:01, 9:02, and returned it pretty quickly to Mr. Johnson, partly because I almost never get a call from Mr. Johnson. I don't think I've had one in 2 years, and partly because things were in such a state that I immediately realized it was possible a defense attorney wanted to reach me for a reason having to do with the developing situation. Mr. Johnson speaks to me. He tells me that the shooter is named Maurice Hill, that the shooter has been calling him. He's been on the phone with the shooter, that Mr. Johnson indicated he was trying to bring about a peaceful resolution, He, I think like every one of us, didn't want to see anyone else shot at, didn't want to see anyone else injured in the course of this horrific event. And then he spoke to Maurice Hill on the phone and asked Mr. Hill if he wanted to talk to me. Mr. Hill was expressing concerns that he might be killed if he came out, concerns about what was going to happen to him when he came out, including the future in terms of any possible case. And Mr. Johnson patched me in, and then we both spoke to Maurice Hill, who at that time, in my opinion, was in a very animated, excited, frankly, dangerous state. I mean, obviously he was dangerous, but emotionally, he seemed to be, on the one hand, reaching out to someone to try to end the situation without being killed, and also in a way that he would somehow find acceptable. But on the other hand, he seemed to be a man who probably at the other end was holding a gun, who, as far as I knew, still had hostages in the building and needed to be brought to a calmer place. So I did what I could. I am no hostage negotiator. I have no such training. Neither is Mr. Johnson, nor does he. But we were doing what we could to try to lower the volume, to bring more calm about, to get him to a more rational position. Now, Mr. Johnson had a number of contacts that evening, not only with Mr. Hill, but also with the police commissioner. There were a number of contacts. I'm not going to go through all the details, but there did come a point where I was at this district attorney's office late in the evening, and I was on a four-way call with the police commissioner, with Mr. Johnson, with Maurice Hill, and myself, and we were continuing various other efforts in different ways, but with the same goal, which was to bring about a peaceful resolution so there would not be another officer having to go at a man who might shoot at them or hurt them or kill them. We had the miraculous moment of having all these officers shot, many of whom I had visited, none of whom were facing a life-threatening injury, thank God. And the last thing we wanted was to come out of this with officers going in to take him, someone who had fired off over 100 rounds and have them fired upon or, heaven forbid, killed or injured. So the conversation continued, and then eventually, later in the evening, Mr. Johnson contacted me and indicated that he believed he could get Maurice Hill to come out, but that Maurice Hill wanted to, in some fashion, see him and see me out on the street. In Mr. Johnson's opinion, that meant Maurice Hill was more likely to put down the gun, empty his hands, drop the cell phone, and come out in a way that would be safest for law enforcement, safest for the neighborhood, and also potentially would mean that Mr. Hill would be apprehended, right? So I went there. Mr. Johnson was there. That was done with the understanding of the police commissioner. Police commissioner, once again, who I think did a tremendous job, and I think the police department did an amazing job with the entire incident, kept us off the block, but we were nearby, and Mr. Johnson was on the phone, on speaker, with Maurice Hill as he exited that property and as he turned himself in without there being any further gunfire. I want you to understand something, though. I don't take credit for any of that, and I don't think Mr. Johnson does either. We believe that the people who solved this from beginning to end are in the police department and maybe some of their federal colleagues who came down and provided assistance. They are the ones who deserve the credit. I want none of it. I am well aware, and the commissioner spoke to us after the surrender, I'm well aware that tear gas was used to bring Mr. Hill out of that home, and I tend to agree with the commissioner that it was, despite good intentions, it wasn't anything that I did, it wasn't anything that Mr. Johnson did that solved this. It was eventually, it was first of all the incredible extraction of the hostages, and secondarily, it was an awful lot of efforts by the police commissioner, which I was not in terms of communicating with Mr. Hill, and then it was ultimately the timely, careful use of tear gas that I think brought Mr. Hill out safely.
There are reports you were asked to leave the hospital when you went to visit the officers. Given your progressive policies, your contentious relationship with some in police, how difficult was last night?
So no one asked me to leave the hospital. In fact, I was specifically told at both hospitals that I would have the opportunity to speak to the officers. At Einstein, I spoke to, I think, every single officer except one who was tied up with his family. I went to Temple twice, but it was a busy night. And it was a busy night including being at the scene, being at both hospitals, being on phone calls, coming to the office, trying to see what we could do by hook or by crook to try to get Mr. Hill in custody without any further danger to police officers or the community. So as much as I would have liked it, I didn't have a chance to visit with the officers at the Temple that evening. I hope we'll be able to do it. I don't know who told you that report, but you know, I apologize when people tell you things that are untrue.
Sir, you said hostages. Who exactly was being held hostage? Are you saying that you officers were held hostage?
There were multiple people who, in one way or another, were being held. The officers have been described at times as having been hostages in a sense. I mean, it's more complicated than that, and there were other individuals in there. I am not going to make any further comment on that, though. I do not want to interfere with the police department and they're putting together the investigative paperwork.
Why raise the name of McNesby, why raise the position of the head of the Fraternal Order of Police at the top of this? Do you think that he has stated inaccurate information in an attempt to continue to undercut you?
I'll leave that to you to decide once you see what his various comments are and how carefully he identifies Maurice Hill.
Okay, why did you raise his name? You did, so why?
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, can you just go back to explaining why you don't think that's going to affect the case if you think
Let me do this. We have two different questions. I'll come to your second, please. Did I know Mr. Hill in advance? No, I'd never heard of him. And your question?
What was the second part to the other question I asked, which was, you don't think that that's going to impact this case at all, that you were on the phone with Mr. Hill during the negotiations?
You know, I don't think so, but I do not, you know, this has been a very fluid situation. We certainly are going to examine that seriously and carefully. If it raises any potential issue, just as, you know, Mr. Johnson's conversing with him may raise any issue in terms of whether he's going to represent this man or not. I don't know if he will. We'll look at that and we'll do whatever the law requires.
Were there any police with regard to Maurice Hill and or a co-defendant?
Let me go here first, if I may. I've already answered one for you, but I will come back. Yes, sir.
Did you speak to police before you first spoke with the man inside?
I did speak with a lot of police, and I also was with the police commissioner when he gave his first address to the press at Temple Hospital.
No, what I'm saying is, when you received the phone call from the attorney, did you speak to any of the incident commanders before taking the initiative to speak with the man?
So the answer is no, and I'm not sure what you mean by initiative, because what happened is I picked up a phone call from Shaka Johnson, who within about 2 minutes three-wayed in Maurice Hill. It was not an option. I frankly don't know why anyone in that situation would want me to drop everything and hang up. We were having an opportunity to calm down a very agitated person who had a gun and had hostages in the facility. You know, ideally, I guess in a perfect world, if you could have read the future and known this call was coming, I would have liked to do that, but there was no way to do that.
Larry, what do you think is the most important thing you said to Hill on the phone?
I don't think anything I said is that important. I think that what was important is that we were able to calm him down. We were able to slow down the process a little bit, and that meant that we could get out of the way and that let the police do the frankly brilliant things that they did. I don't know exactly when they extracted hostages, police, from the building, but you know, if my timing is correct on how it was reported, it was close to the time when we were on the phone. Someone who has a hot gun in his hand, and an incredibly dangerous one, and is in an agitated state, that is someone you want to slow down. And if that gave in any way the opportunity to the police to do the best job they could, I think that is the only effect. But I want to say once again, I don't take any credit for this. None. I truly believe this was just brilliant policing and maybe a little bit of a miracle.
In your view of how you run your office, I'm sorry, in your view of how to better run the district attorney's office, you've been able to look at his history a little bit, better manage it for us. How might the system, as you think it should operate, have better handled a person with this capacity?
Well, again, I think, I will try to answer your question, but I also don't want to be unfair and pretend that those prior prosecutors and those prior police officers, probation officers, federal agents, or the federal judge, I don't want to pretend that they had some crystal ball and they could see the future. I do think what this record indicates is a long series of serious criminal acts. They did not all make their way to a conviction. And obviously, when you have a serious case where a person is guilty, ideally, prosecutors are going to be able to rely on good investigations, and they'll be able to obtain convictions. So I think that, for example, our administration's disinterest in prosecuting minor offenses, let's just say like possession of marijuana, and its much greater interest in going after more serious offenses is more of a focused approach to serious crime. If you look back at the time period when this occurred, you will see that in some of these time periods there were 70,000 cases processed by the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office. That number has come down over the years, but now it's closer to 40,000 cases. Well, there's a reason for that. Because we would rather spend our time on people who shoot guns and big-time drug dealers and rapists than spend our time prosecuting 6,000 marijuana possession cases, which is what they used to do in Philadelphia County. I do think that there are issues of focus here. I say that to you as I come back from a very constructive meeting with the presiding judge over criminal, with the public defender, with various other stakeholders, where we are continuing an ongoing discussion about how more effectively and how better to deal with shooting cases. That has been underway for quite some time. We've already made some success in the municipal court and are proceeding essentially now with what we think is a better way to prosecute at the preliminary hearing level, but we're trying to do the same at the level of the Court of Common Pleas, which is the trial level. So, you know, that's the kind of thing that becomes possible when you're not wasting the system's time on 6,000 marijuana possession cases, and you can try to reallocate resources, put more lawyers on these cases. We are trying to move, and I believe we will successfully move, to what is essentially vertical prosecution, meaning a prosecutor that has a shooting case where someone is injured from beginning to end, instead of handing it from prosecutor to prosecutor, which has historically often been done. We're trying to get there. We were trying to get there long before this incident happened. Our meeting today was scheduled over a week before this happened. I think that's where we need to go, to a more focused approach that goes at serious crime in a serious way, but that is able to do it because we're not wasting time locking up people for things like marijuana possession. I did promise you
Again, are you or anyone in your office aware of any open cases involving Maurice Hill and or a defendant or defendants?
Open cases in Philadelphia County?
Yes.
I am not aware of any unresolved open criminal matter in Philadelphia County. Now, having said that, I do have some information that would indicate that there is a warrant for probation supervision, and that there actually was a date scheduled by the judge who, it's either probation or parole, but there is a date scheduled, perhaps next week, for a hearing on that matter. I'm aware of that, but you asked me about open criminal matters. There are, to my knowledge, there are 0 open criminal matters in Philadelphia County, and there haven't been any open criminal matters in Philadelphia County since at least 2016. Yes?
Comment on that, were you aware that there was possibly a warrant card, you know, if the probation officer contacts the judge and then a warrant card is issued, actually yesterday on Mr. Hill?
What I am aware of is that there is a warrant or warrants out there. The specifics about something happening yesterday, I don't have that information, no.
And specific to a probation violation?
I don't have that information. That's the first I'm hearing of it, but I'm not surprised.
Are you concerned about the legality of that search warrant, given that the address changed as the officer saw that the staff had moved?
You know, we really don't have enough information to evaluate that. There are many good reasons why events can occur in one location that create an exigent circumstance, as they say in the law, that would require officers to go into another location, but I cannot say one way or the other what the evidence is going to show. It would be very premature for me to comment further on that.
Were they at the right house?
I think it's very premature for me to comment on that because I don't know what the right house means. If the right house, national news means national people want the facts. That means,
Were they at the right house?
okay, I'm sorry. The international people are also entitled to the truth and to the facts, and it would be inappropriate of me to guess at what the truth and the facts
So
are.
you're saying you don't, what was the warrant for that they were serving?
This was a drug-related warrant.
Search warrant on the home, right?
The search-
There was a search warrant, yes. I'm not going to get into all the
They didn't
specifics.
relate- They said that didn't relate to a state case, it relates to a federal case?
No, that's not correct.
It
You know,
relates to a
the way this goes is there's not a case until there are charges, there are investigations, there are arrests, but there's not a case until there are charges. So I guess if your question, sir, and I'm not trying to be, picky with you, but if your question, sir, is was it related to a state investigation, the answer is yes, it was related to a state investigation.
So when do you think there will be, when will you be arraigned, I just want to understand the process. You said earlier the investigation's continuing, when could we?
I would respectfully suggest that you'll probably get more information from the police. There are a lot of things going on in an investigative way right now. I think it's inappropriate for me to step on the police by talking about what they may be doing, even though I'm aware of some of it. I think you may be able to get more answers from the police commissioner, but only if he feels it is appropriate from an investigative perspective. I don't see any way that the process leading up to charging is going to take more than a couple days, but one never knows. It's a complicated situation. There was gas that was put into that location. Gas can affect people's health. There's a lot of other things going on that may or may not be happening while this person is in custody. So I'm not going to mislead you. I don't have definite answers other than if you look at these kinds of cases in general, there are charges within a couple days.
Now, was Maurice Hill's name on that warrant?
I respectfully will not answer that question at this time. Yes, sir.
Is it problematic for a person who has hostages to be speaking with the district attorney, a county prosecutor, or somebody that eventually will prosecute them? Does it in any way create a problem in the future? This is who they want to negotiate instead of the trained tactical people that are on the ground?
I mean, let me put it this way. Is it what I was hoping for? No, it wasn't what I was hoping for. I don't think the police commissioner was hoping to speak to this individual either. I mean, there are certain rules of engagement that are ordinary. Doesn't mean they're always right. Let's face it. In some ways, the outcome here was pretty good because this man turned himself in. But generally speaking, hostage negotiators don't try to put you on the phone with the boss, and yet the police commissioner spoke to this individual and tried to speak to him for hours. I don't begrudge him that. We all react to the situation we have. I did not pick up a phone that said to me, shooter. I didn't even know the name Maurice Hill. I picked up a phone that said Shaka Johnson, and next thing I knew, we were in a three-way. That's the reality. So, we do the best we can. I'm not making any claim that what I did or did not do is perfect, but I am making this claim. It's not what I did or did not do in no way is important compared to the amazing work that was done by Philadelphia Police and also some of their federal collaborators. Yes.
I know you talk a lot about risk management and things are going to happen, but is it fair to say that the criminal justice system in this instance failed?
I think it's fair to say that the criminal justice system, imperfect as it is, did not stop this terrible incident. All right. Thank you very much.